The Sixth Ward, located in downtown New Orleans, is one of the smaller wards of the city. Being just under 40 blocks geographically, the Sixth Ward is long and narrow, stretching back from the Mississippi River. The boundary downriver or lower side is Esplanade Avenue, across which is the Seventh Ward. The upper side is St. Philip's, across which is the Fifth Ward. The back boundary is Bayou St. John, the land across which is also part of the Fifth Ward, making the Sixth Ward one of the smallest wards geographically. The Sixth Ward includes the heart of the Treme neighborhood, including St. Augustine Church and Back Street Cultural Museum. At the back of the ward, along the bayou, is the historic home of James Pitot, second mayor of New Orleans, now known as the Pitot House Museum. In November of 2007, Robert Norton would take on the role of commander with the NOPD 1st District. The 6th Ward of New Orleans will be part of his beat. It's 2 years after Hurricane Katrina. The 2600 block of Dumaine has been identified as one of the hottest blocks of the city, known for attempted deletions, crushings that hard in 11.5. Maurice Owls, a longtime business owner in the neighborhood who has owned and operated the barbershop on the corner of Broad and Dumaine for over 2 decades, will confirm that the block has never been so wild. There was an obvious difference in the neighborhood. The older residents of the area who would once frequent their front porches could no longer be seen sitting outside. 1/3 of the homes on the block would still be abandoned or empty for 5 years after Katrina. Neighbors would say that they felt increasingly powerless in the face of Steppas and hustlers who had taken over the hood and set up sets throughout the block that would bring rivalries to the block. Since Katrina, 5 people would be crushed, and every other day would seem like Iraq. Thanks to its prime location right off of Broad and Orleans Avenue, the block has always had work being pumped on it. Residents would confirm that Broad and Dumaine Streets for decades has been called Dolores Block or D Block, after the late Dolores Mama Santiago. Dolores was a retired security guard and school crossing guard who was legendary for her generosity and kindness. In 1998, the Times-Picayune will post an article about how a man and a woman would leap from their second-story window to escape a raging fire. Firefighters who knew the block brought the injured pair to Santiago, who would nurse them at her house in the middle of the block until paramedics arrived. Known as Mama on the Block, Dolores would take care of anyone that had been injured. Miss Dolores would pass in 1999. People from the hood, young and old, would get tatted in her honor. It is these same tats that the NOPD would now use to associate the dudes in the hood as a clique. NOPD would allege that members of D Block will be responsible for much of the attempted deletions and crushings in part of the Mid-City and Treme areas. D Block will be described as steppers, jackers, and hustlers. You name it, they were doing it. It is rumored that the clique operated primarily in an area bounded by North Broad, Esplanade, North Claiborne, and Orleans Avenue. In late 2010, racketeering charges will be put forth against 11 men that were classified as D Block, who would be accused of pumping work and crushing their ops. In September of 2010, Mitchell White would be allegedly crushed by Rashad Washington. The other deletions would occur in 2006 and another in 2008. A house in the middle of the block will be spray painted "Rest in Peace Stank" for Eric Stank McCormick Jr., the block's first post-Katrina deletion, who was crushed in November 2006 by Wilbert "Man" Van Buren. It is alleged that Man will bicycle back to the block with a blicky after getting into it with Stank at a dice game. Less than 3 hours later, Latrone Court will be crushed a few houses down the block. In 2008, Sylvester Cash and Maurice Marty Charles will be crushed toward the end of the block. In August of that same year, as Dolores Mama Santiago stood outside talking with her next-door neighbor, 2 dudes would start busing, one of which looked 14 years of age. The other maybe a year or two older. As she crouched down behind the car, Mama would see a relative of hers stoop next to her with two young kids. Mr. Loris would yell, "Stop!" The young boys would flee. Like other sets in the city, hustlers on Dumaine would stash their work inside abandoned houses and make their transactions in the alleys. Neighbors up and down the block would post no trespassing signs to no avail. Things had gotten out of control. 5 of the men indicted would be cousins that grew up on D Block: Darnell Moose Ellis, Shelton Jackson, McQuinn Lewis, Glenn McCormick, and Lance Price. The 11 men charged had collectively amassed at least 100 arrests, most of them related to hustling, some involving crushings.
But we begin with what law enforcement officials are calling a major bust. Investigators say they've taken a gang off the streets of New Orleans. WDSU News reporter Travers Mackel is live in the news center to tell us about this gang. Travers?
Well, Scott, the gang is called the 6th Ward D Block, and District Attorney Leon Canizero says the 11 men who make up the gang have terrorized an area of the 6th Ward near Dumaine and Broad Street for years. Right now, 10 men are in custody. All are charged with racketeering. The men, as you see here, are Lance Prince, Sheldon Jackson, Marquin Lewis, Blake Ricks, Nathaniel Brown, Torin Duhon, Jamal Howard, Terrell Muse, Cecil Martin, and Glenn McCormick. On the run is 20-year-old Darnell Ellis. Leon Canizero says the men operated in the 2600 block of Dumaine Street. Canizero says this is the first time in more than 10 years that a local prosecutor has used the racketeering statute against the gang, meaning that they can bring up all of these charges, all of these crimes that they're charged with doing in court.
Records would show Torin Duhan pled guilty earlier that year to a Frenchman Street attempted deletion. He is currently in state prison. Terrell Muse was charged with a September attempted deletion in New Orleans East. Nathaniel Brown Jr. was arrested on October in suspicion of attempted deletion of a childhood friend during a 211 in New Orleans East. In 2010, Cecil Martin was charged with domestic battery. In 2009, a camera would catch Jamal Howard making a sale at the corner of Broad in Dumaine. He is now being held at the State Mental Hospital in Feliciana. He would not be found mentally competent. In July of 2017, the 1st District GA unit, with the assistance of the ATF and DEA, began investigating in the 2500 and 2600 blocks of Dumaine Street. During this time, investigating officers would identify 9 subjects that they say were responsible for moving work on the blocks. In May 2018, a state grand jury indictment will be secured for the subjects for conspiring to engage in racketeering acts. 3 of the subjects, Dwayne Jenkins, Gabriel Bell, and Brian Lott, were already incarcerated when other members of the group were taken into custody. During this investigation, 4 additional subjects, Teron Blackman, Glenn McCormick, Derek Brumfield, and Lawrence Conway, would be apprehended. Wayman Williams would be apprehended on May 14, 2018. Johnny Johnson would remain at large at the time. The Special Ops Division would execute search warrants of 2 targeted locations. Officers will locate Glenn Spot McCormick and Derek Youngboy Brumfield as they attempted to flee the residence in the 2500 block of Dumaine Street to Riviera. A search of the residence would uncover 10.36 grams of 11.5 and nearly 9,000 cash. As the search warrant was being executed in the 2500 block of Dumaine, officers would conduct a traffic stop on Lawrence Lowe Conway, who was in possession of 55 bags of dog food totaling 13.20 grams. 1st District officers would also conduct a traffic stop of Teron T. Blackman. He would be found in possession of 1.16 grams of 11.5 and $327 cash. Another search warrant would be executed at the Wayman Williams home in the 600 block of North Cayoso. Johnny Johnson, aka J5, would remain at large. It is alleged that the subjects would use the rap moniker Money Wave as a front and cover to their actual dealings. All of the men would be indicted. The following were reported to be taken off the streets by the NOPD: 15 tools, 16 pounds of that perp, 116.43 grams of that hard, 10 ounces of dog food, and $35,000.
As the search warrant was being executed in the 2500 block of Dumaine, members of the 1st District conducted a traffic stop of another target identified as Lawrence Conway, also known as Lowe, who was under surveillance. A search incidental to his arrest revealed Conway to be in possession of 55 bags totaling 13.20 grams packaged for sale. 1st District officers also conducted a traffic stop of Teron Blackman, also known as T, who was also under surveillance, and a search incidental to his arrest revealed that Blackman was in possession of 1.16 grams and $327 in U.S. currency. Special Operations also executed yet another search warrant in the 600 block of North Gayoso Street, the residence of Wayman Williams, but did not locate Williams during the search, but he was later apprehended. Johnny Johnson, also known as J5, remains at large and will be located by the Vials Unit. And if there's anyone who knows his whereabouts, they can contact members of the 1st District right away, or they can contact Crime Stoppers to do it anonymously.